Good morning, everyone. My name is Jim Zuffoletti. I'm the president of OpenQ, and I'm thrilled to have you join us today for our webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about safeguarding life science companies against social media compliance exposure. This is an area of much discussion in industry and in the hallways of companies, and we're looking forward to sharing with you some of the lessons learned that we've learned from the trail, as well as having a dialogue with you and understanding some of the questions that you may have after we present our webinar to you. So with that, I'd like to go through the agenda for today. First of all, we're going to talk about the benefits and the risks of the associated with the social media landscape. We're going to also spend some time in this first section about talking about some of the ways to speak to legal and compliance organizations and approach the compliance challenges associated with social initiatives. After that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and co-founder, Ottavio Freire, who will make a demonstration of OpenQ's social. The goal of the overall objective today, again, is we all recognize, I think, to a greater or lesser extent, that social is a compelling part of an initiative in terms of both business, and that companies are now looking for ways to address that need alongside the demand to address the compliance challenges associated with it. So let's go through a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, the way that we'll run this webinar is that we will put everyone on mute during the presentation and demonstration, but we will have the chat capability turned on. If you wish to submit a question, please submit the question to @, which you should see if you open up your chat window, and then where you see the @all, and there's a chat down, it's the @JimZ. Get to the question directly. We will follow up with you after the conference if you identify your and make sure that we answer your questions. Now, first, let's talk. I'll do very quickly introduce OpenQ to you. OpenQ is a provider of technology, tools, and information that help life sciences and healthcare companies to connect to their outside networks, whether or not those networks be social or medical or formal or informal networks. We're deeply committed to the concepts associated with both going social and connecting to networks, but to do that in a way that drives compliance. Frequent participant in social dialogue and webinars and presentations. We also believe that social occurs in an ecosystem of many companies coming together, so you can see that we are aggressive in pursuit of partnership with other social media and social marketing companies. And we believe that where social takes place is truly an intersection of not just technology, but also information. This is a quick picture of OpenQ. We work with the concept of both life sciences and healthcare companies and believe that the best way to serve the industry, to serve the patient, is through effective and efficient operation of formal and informal networks. From those are going to come the best collaborations, which will ultimately address the needs of patients and industry. So let's talk a little bit about social. So the first thing that we're going to do today is talk about the compelling benefits associated with social, and we'll break that up into two different components. First one is external. Many of you are familiar with some of these benefits that we've listed here on the slide. This is a rather exhaustive list, but the reason that people get into social from the beginning is because there are compelling business benefits for it, for both the patient as well as the conduct of organization. We've seen organizations use social to effectively increase their outreach associated with clinical trials. We've also seen companies use it for more effective monitoring and insight regarding adverse events out in the market. On the internal side, companies are using it as part of their overall digital marketing campaign, where they're able to get their message out to the community in a quicker, faster, more efficient basis. Now, one of the things that we'd like to highlight for today, and we'll get into this in a little bit greater detail in a few minutes, is the fact that social really operates in two distinct but sometimes overlapping spheres. Often when people talk about social, they're preoccupied with the concept of external social networks. How do I connect to Facebook? How do I engage via Twitter? But one of the things that often gets lost in the shuffle is the fact that many companies, by virtue of being extraordinarily large organizations with many external collaborators, stand to gain a tremendous amount by conducting business socially on an internal or an extended enterprise basis. And what you can see on the slide here are a number of the different benefits that are out there and have been discussed about companies who have gained and benefited from implementing internal social business. And they range from areas like facilitation of collaboration, speeding time to market, and also opportunities like lowering the overall cost of executing processes and the like. So there are an incredible amount of benefits to be gained from companies who are looking to go social. But let's dig into this a little bit more by talking about social within a model that we've set up within OpenQ. So if you think about social, one of the things that represents a major shift for companies that are looking to go social versus companies who have a digital media campaign is that social is about the interactivity that can take place between you and an internal or an external community. And we break that down into three different components, which you can see on the screen here today. The first is the ability to listen and monitor, and you can see there that that's the beginning where this really starts to distinguish itself, that being a social campaign from a digital campaign. One of the major needs associated with going social is that ability to listen and to monitor to activity. A second component of social is its ability to provide an outlet for companies who are looking to get answers via research. So if you're looking to find out how people are talking about a particular disease state or how people are talking about a particular subject matter or area, the social community is a rich playground for companies to gather insights and research. And then the third major component of social is the ability to engage. Ultimately, a campaign isn't truly social if it doesn't allow that ability for a company to both listen and take in feedback as well as respond back to it. The true gains that are to be had from companies going social are really predicated on their ability to demonstrate that at the end of the social process, if you will, an engagement takes place between you and that patient or you and that healthcare provider or within individuals within a company. So we'll start talking a little bit about, and this will set up for a later discussion. One of the terms that we like to use within OpenQ is the concept of a channel to help companies break down the challenge associated with going social, because there are literally thousands of different ways that a company can go social. And so one of the ways that we like to help companies think about that is within the concept of internal, private, or external. So an internal social channel would be a channel such as Chatter or Yammer or Jive. A private social network could be a social network like a Within3, and an external social network could be a social network like Facebook or Patients Like Me. And the point that we wanted to share with companies who are thinking about taking on the idea of going social in a more aggressive way is that the degree of engagement and the way that you engage individuals will shift from channel to channel from within an organization. So if you're thinking about turning on an internal social platform, the way that you're looking to engage people internally is going to differ versus whether or not you're going to have a more interactive Facebook presence. So what's the nature of interaction? At this point, we're going to share with you a little bit of survey data that we received from Gartner. This is from an excellent study that they did of social activity and social intelligence. And one of the big takeaways had to do with the fact that as companies are going social, both internally and externally, they're looking to gain a lot of different things. And you can see here echoes back to some of the original messages that I talked about at the outset in terms of benefits from the benefits that people have seen from going social. And they range from more effective project team collaboration, better feedback from the customer, better idea management. One of the things we hear a lot is in an extended enterprise setting is when you're engaging a key opinion leader, for example, the ability to have a social network that key opinion leader can be involved in can often unlock that key opinion leader's ability to offer insights, which could be dramatically important for a company as they think about positioning and the way that they're going to market. In the world, one of the things that we've done as an organization is we spend a lot of time monitoring social activity in general, both at the brand level, at the therapeutic area, and at the company level. And on a future webinar, we'll share some of our findings. But one of the things that we wanted to share today is just to take, for example, the world of oncology as a specific area of focus. You can see in oncology, there is a lot of data which suggests that physicians who are focused on oncology, the clinical oncologists, the surgical oncologists, are very interested in gathering information online, are very savvy about the idea of getting social. And in response to that, there are a lot of networks out there that cater to the oncology community. You see a not comprehensive list on the right-hand side. And the point that we wanted to make from this is there's clearly a lot of social activity that's going on in the oncology space, but one of the areas that's most notable is the industry's presence, life science company industry presence in the social space is notably small compared to the number of third-party networks and third-party sites that companies can get involved in the dialogue. So why is that taking place? And we've had hundreds and hundreds of discussions with professionals in industry at this point, and we see that it all comes back to the concept of risk, that companies who engage in a social dialogue because it's interactive feel that they're often opening themselves up to risks that they have to then follow through and address because of their company's procedures and policies and the like. And you can see some of the examples of social risk listed here on the screen, ranging from trade secret breaches to inappropriate promotion of products to inappropriate language, to confidentiality, to off-label. So companies are, based on the discussions that we've had, extraordinarily hesitant to go social because of the concerns regarding all of the different risks that are out there. Well, one of the objectives that we have behind the discussion today is to tell you it is possible to address these risks, and we're going to talk about it in terms of both process and procedure as well as technology. So one of the things to start understanding risk and the ability to address risk is to break risk down and talk about a little bit about what we call the old model of risk versus the new model of risks. And what do we mean there is any of you who have been associated with the industry for more than 10 years probably are aware that the way risk was often viewed is in the operation of the organization. How did the organization exist as its own entity unto itself? One of the big shifts that's taken place over the last 10 years from our perception is the way that companies are operating now is extraordinarily external in nature, meaning you cannot operate a pharmaceutical, a biotech, or a medical device company without interaction with outside stakeholders, without collaboration with outside stakeholders. And with that extending of the network also becomes the extending of the risk. So any company that is looking to address potential risk associated with social needs to think about it not just in terms of the internal activities that are taking place, but also the interactions that take place between their company and outside individuals, HCPs, patients, and key operators and the like. Another challenge that we see is that risk is creating, if you will, a cycle of fear in the industry. We see organizations who are looking to go social who start with the concern about being crosswise for regulatory guidance. Then they get concerned about the fact that there is a lack of clear guidance from the FDA in terms of the conduct of social media campaigns. There are incredible legal perils at play. Anyone who's on this call is probably familiar with the fines and litigation costs and costs of discovery associated with any investigations. There are policies, both internal and external, and all of this ultimately comes traceable back to cost. If I take on a social media campaign, am I going to be taking on an incredible cost to monitor and respond to any activity that takes place? And this is an area of big concern. It's also an area of big opportunity. So I glossed over this concept from the last one, but when we think about cost, we think about cost not just in terms of the cost of monitoring and what do I do to address that, but also how do I address the cost of noncompliance? You can see here on the slide a number of different examples associated with noncompliance, and one of the big takeaways from this is even a company that's doing everything right can be subject to substantial costs if they have to support an investigation, even if it results in a no finding associated with it. So how do we adapt to this reality? Well, let's talk about making the case for social. So as companies think about making the case for social, there are a couple of things that we'd like to take you through in terms of making recommendations before I turn over to Ottavio to run the demonstration. The first thing I'd like to do is make some policy and procedure recommendations in terms of how to engage the dialogue. And then the second thing we'll take you through is a framework for how we believe technology can address the compliance challenge of going social. So first of all, I want to start with a couple of thoughts based on the discussions that we've had with peers in the industry and the like in terms of how companies need to think about going social. So first of all, one of the big objections that we see from companies is the fact that there hasn't been general guidance that's really actionable from the FDA. And that's really created, if you will, a chilling effect on the industry's drive to go social. One of the things that we often talk about with customers is that there are two positive signs that we can see associated with addressing guidance in social practices. The first is if you can think about social not as a new trend, if you will, but just another way to communicate and interact with patients and HCPs and the like, often it becomes easier to address the nature of the dialogue in a social arena. Before social, it was possible to receive feedback from patients. It was possible to receive feedback and questions from HCPs. None of that changes in the new arena. So while there isn't specific FDA guidance, there is a fairly good level of established standards associated with how to handle communications and interactivity that take place within different stakeholder communities. The second item that we see as a source of optimism is while there isn't a tremendous social presence in terms of industry, and again, we'll address some of this in terms of magnitude in a future webinar, there are a number of companies out there who are receiving very positive attention for their social outreach. One of the companies that we read about a lot is Sanofi Aventis, for example. So we see companies starting to wade into that, and one of the things that allows you to do as an organization advocating for social activity is you can point to other peers who are taking their steps into the social arena. Another piece of advice that we give to companies is you cannot initiate a proposal associated with social activity without embedding compliance from the beginning. And what we mean there is often we've seen where a social campaign will fail when it's proposed to compliance or proposed to legal is the compliance aspects associated with the social campaign. What do we do once we receive that feedback haven't been thought out ahead of time. So a company's ability to embed compliance from the beginning is a critical consideration. And the last component to highlight here before we move to the next slide is one of the other cases that we make to companies is social is entirely out of control of the industry in toto. And what I mean there is industry can't make the decision whether or not the industry goes social because, as you saw on this previous slide about oncology, the social dialogue is already taking place. What companies need to make a decision about is, are they going to participate and join that dialogue and therefore gain the benefits associated with that? Now let's move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about another piece of advice if they're going to take on a social campaign. And that's that one of the most powerful things to do is to break down social into multiple channels. So when a company is thinking about going social, they really think about it's not just one blanket decision, it's an individual set of decisions at a time. You want to go social internally. You may want to go social just externally by engaging via Facebook or a private patient community. The second recommendation that we have for companies is think about social, not the violations that could occur associated with social, not as a single policy unto itself, but in support of multiple policies that your company already has in place. You already have policies for handling appropriate language. You already have policies for handling confidentiality. You already have policies for addressing privacy-related issues. You already have policies concerning the appropriate management of branding language or comments associated with products. And when you go about going social, it's not just about adhering to a single social policy. It's about what can I do to make sure I can adhere to all of my existing policies, each on an individual basis. The third component associated with it is the fact that not only should you think about making the case as an individual channel at a time, and not only think about individual policies when you're talking with compliance, you should also think about your community. And what I mean there is companies can go social, as we said, by just including their internal stakeholders. It could be just within an R&D organization that a company looks to go social and collaborate. It could be collaboration that includes the KOL community. It could be a disease area community, or it could be a community that includes everyone or is available to all. And just as we said at the outset, a company's ability by breaking down your engagement into different levels or tiers of community, you can make different decisions about how we engage individuals. So, for example, you might say within an R&D community you want open dialogue back and forth, whereas you may say that for a global patient community, you want to enable some degree of dialogue back and forth, but you need to put in safeguards in place to protect your compliance interests. So with that, let me talk about, so those are some general advice that we give to companies in terms of addressing the dialogue that they'll have with compliance when they're looking to go social. Let's talk about specific capability areas that we believe that technology is particularly well suited to address associated with compliance. And we'll take these one at a time. So one of the things that technology can be a real contributor to social compliance is in the area of collecting multiple social business feeds. One of the things we hear about with companies is that they take on compliance on a system-by-system basis. What are we going to do about Facebook compliance? What are we going to do about our chatter compliance? One of our recommendations is no matter where you're pulling information from, try to think about technology's ability to collect all of those social feeds together so that they can be analyzed together, as opposed to having multiple different solutions or different people who have responsibility for monitoring. The second component is analyze the data and risk. One of the things that technology represents is a real step forward in the ability to filter through and analyze the language of information that's posted. And so technology's contribution here is the ability to take what could be an extraordinarily large funnel of information that a company needs to monitor and take it down to the most appropriate, the most important messages to address and then act on and follow through. The third component that technology can be a real contributor to is the ability to classify risk. So often companies have multiple policies that they're looking to enforce, such as the use of inappropriate or not use of inappropriate language, as well as concern over off-label promotion, and need to consider an off-label promotion event as a much higher risk event that needs to be immediately acted on versus the inappropriate use of language in an external post. And then finally, the other contribution that technology can make to social compliance is the ability to conduct investigations. So often what we hear from regulatory officials is it's not about the ability necessarily to prevent inappropriate activity, it's the ability to demonstrate that if inappropriate activity takes place, is a company immediately responding and following through according to their policies and procedures. So let's talk about each of these very quickly. So when we talk about collect, what we're talking about is the ability to bring in social activity from multiple sources, and you can see some examples on this slide. You may have an internal chatter community. You may be listening publicly via Radian 6. You may have an HCP or a KOL portal. And the power of technology is the ability to bring in the individual sources that you can see on the slide here. The next component is the ability to analyze policy risk and events. And you can see from the slide and classify that risk. You can see from the slide here that when you think about individual risk, again, we're talking about the ability to look at a post, to understand the context associated with it, to evaluate it, whether or not it violates individual policies. And what makes a message a potential violation could be based on the content of the message, or it could be other attributes associated with the message, such as who contributed the message or who is potentially able to view the message that's ultimately posted. And then the last major component where technology can be a real contributor is in the support of inline investigations. Again, one of the things that we've seen with companies is that there is a need to have a process and procedure to support follow-through, such that if an inappropriate post takes place and is identified, what does the company need to do? And so technology can be particularly powerful, not just in terms of identifying those risky messages, but also being a means by which you can tag and track and close out items that require follow-through. So those are some of our basic recommendations for companies in terms of thinking about channels, thinking about tiers, how to break down the social challenge, and then how technology can be a major contributor in terms of addressing social risk. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-founder, Ottavio, who will take you through a quick demonstration of the social monitoring challenge and how that's addressed using OpenQ's SafeGuard solution.
Hello there. My name is Ottavio Freire. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at OpenQ. I wanted to show you, to really try to bring to light some of the things that Jim highlighted on how technology can be one of the components. If you think about the policies, the process, and the systems you can place to create to go social and have a social compliant enterprise, This is how our flagship product for social compliance fits into that overall schema of putting a framework in place for a social compliance enterprise. So what I'm going to demonstrate today here is one of the channels that's getting a lot of traction as a social business platform, and that's Salesforce Chatter product. As Jim highlighted, a lot of advantages of being a social business in terms of coordination and collaboration. So Chatter is really at the forefront in terms of capabilities of being a social platform. So we'll highlight today how SafeGuard and Chatter could be the basis of your social enterprise. As a matter of background, I am part of an organization that is in the therapeutic area in neuro, and we have a product called Orvantix. And I'll be logging in as a compliance professional as well as a commercial user for that organization. So to start off, let's go to the OpenQ SafeGuard dashboard. Here's really where you can see some of those capabilities in terms of ease of use, where you pointed SafeGuard to several channels, such as Chatter, and as messages are coming through, they're being highlighted as potentially they could violate a policy. Notice here that there is some inappropriate messages around really in terms of improper business conduct that was brought up, and it was flagged as a medium risk item there about a donation that Dr. Smith had made. Something that you probably want to look against, but clearly not yet due to its context of violation at this point. So how does it flag these issues? How does it bring up off-label or a potential HIPAA violation or adverse event? That's really done by inside SafeGuard by looking at the policies that you want to set up. So if I go now here into my policies, you'll see that for the neuro department, they've enabled a series of policies of high-risk items that they'd like to monitor for against all their channels. And these are range from the common issues that a pharmaceutical or a biotech or healthcare firm more in general could face, such as anti-kickback policy, comparative product claims, off-label promotion, adverse events. Really what we provide is a library of potential violations that a company could face, and then it's up to the compliance professional as they enable a certain channel, again a channel could be Chatter in this case, to decide what of those, when we call them signatures, they would like to turn on. And once they turn on these policies and they start configuring them or customizing them, so they add a signature and they might add the specific keywords that they'll additionally like to monitor for in addition to the signature, and then start setting their scoring, they get to the point where if a violation takes place, it's going to be run against these policies, and then it could be potentially flagged for violations. And the violations can be, as you saw, kind of red, yellow, green, something that's a critical issue that might actually require that the post be immediately taken down or quarantined, or a medium risk item that eventually you want to look at in a body of other contexts to decide if remediation needs to take place. So let's go now and look at how safeguarding would work in action. Let's go back now to Chatter. And let's say that I am now a commercial user, and we've enabled Chatter. Folks are collaborating. They're addressing the issues real time that the organization may face. But however, there's a commercial user that had not paid attention to training, let's say, and posted something as it might seem fairly safe, but could pose a potential challenge for the organization. And I'm going to enter I'm typing here a text. And I basically say, love to get my hands on some trial data. This will show vomiting and nausea while on Ozempic. And he proceeds to post to his community. Several folks might see this. There's obviously, here in this case, as a matter of background, Ozempic, as I mentioned, is a neuro drug. Some doctors might prescribe it for vomiting and nausea. However, vomiting and nausea is not an FDA-approved use, so it would constitute potential off-label promotion. As an organization, you want to be notified of this, and as a compliance professional, you want to be immediately alerted that a potential risk has taken place in one of your networks. In this case, again, it's an internal social business platform using Chatter. So if I look to get my email, click on it, and come here to the dashboard, if I was to just have the dashboard up and monitored, notice that post got flagged as a high-risk item. And the user would have received that high-risk item alert. Here, you can filter for any potential messages that you have for a certain period to kind of drill into, as these come in, potential items that you'd like to investigate. Notice that this week here now, my count went up, and now I have 2 high-risk items that have occurred after that post took place. You can then, at that point, decide to look more into why this post was deemed to be a high-risk item. If I drill down into it, I see that it hit a score of 8. Again, that had to do with how we set up the scoring algorithm against the signatures of potential policies that you would like to monitor for. And from this point on, this user, I am going to add him to a watch list so that if he is to follow up on a new post, his score would go up and you would be immediately alerted, because at this point now, you feel that it's due for remediation. So the compliance professional would look at this dashboard, drill in, he got the alert or she got the alert, comes in here, realizes why it was a high-risk item, realizes they would like to follow that individual from that point onwards, and decides to create a case. And what that does, using Salesforce, it creates a case in Salesforce, and we will proceed to follow that case through its proper remediation process. As Jim highlighted, you will have a policy in place, and you will have a process to remediate type of issue that has occurred. In this case, it's off-label promotion is the context here that you're most concerned with. You've created the case, and then you can remediate according to your internal policy using a case method or internal GRC system that you may have. It could be Exentis, for example, if you're under a CIA or other internal systems. But thank you very much for your time. This is all the time we had. Hopefully that kind of gave you a flavor of how we can monitor and easily set up monitoring based on channels and have the capability to remediate violations once they occur.
Thank you, everyone. If you have a question now, you can submit it via the chat by submitting it to @JimSpaceZ. I'll open it up for now, and when there are some questions, we'll respond to those questions. Okay, the first question is that came in had to do with the individual, a question regarding OpenQ and lawyers on staff. Let me try to answer that question. So OpenQ maintains an advisory board and dialogue with the legal community. That said, one of the things that we stress with our customers is ultimately their compliance organizations and legal affairs group are going to hold sway in terms of the interpretation of the policy. So what we present is our experience with the best practices that we've seen in the industry and the capabilities within a tool like SafeGuard to be configured to meet a company's specific policy requirements. We're very aware that companies interpret policies different within industry, and therefore the SafeGuard was built with that flexibility from the very beginning. Another question that came in had to do with controlling data and the challenge associated with monitoring. One of the things that we see a lot, and we're aware of companies that have made the decision to go social, and the response to going social has included a substantial commitment of their own resources in monitoring Facebook sites, monitoring Twitter pages, and the like. With the use of SafeGuard, what we're endeavoring to do is to take a volume of activity that may be coming in from social activities and to reduce it down to the 2 to 5% of messages that really truly need to be scrutinized. And by doing that, it substantially reduces the monitoring burden that an organization has. And because the monitoring and filtering and analysis takes place by a consistent mechanism, you're able to present to an investigation not only the fact that you are consistently going through messages, but you're also filtering down to those messages which represent the highest risk and responding and documenting your response to that. Another question just came in terms of implementation regarding SafeGuard and others and social. What's the implementation time that it takes? We typically see implementation between 3 and 4 weeks associated with bringing SafeGuard online and monitoring multiple social channels for a customer. One of the biggest critical components in that are the dialogue with compliance to ensure that the policies that SafeGuard is monitoring for from day one are in line with the company's policies. And with that, we are at the end of our session. If you do have any messages or additional questions afterwards, please feel free to contact us. I'm available at jimz@openq.com, and Otavio is available at otaviof, that's OTAVIOF, @openq.com. Thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. And best of luck in your organization as you try to take your initiative social.